On today's episode, I'll break down the Blackhawks naming Jeff Blashill as their next head coach, as well as Michael Pekka as an assistant.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can check me out on X at Jack Bushman 2, but make sure to go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way, you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Hit that like button right off the jump if you're watching over on YouTube. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Even if you're someone who's regularly tuning in through an audio platform, hop on over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button for me. It's 100% free, will not cost you anything, and helps me out in a real massive way in growing my platform. But happy Thursday, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Now it's official, Blackhawks fans. Jeff Blashill has been named the 42nd coach in Blackhawks franchise history. Not much of a surprise given all the leaks and rumors that have been coming out the last couple of days, but the decision is now final. And what I wanted to open things up with on today's episode is a bit of a background on Jeff Blashill. For those of you who aren't familiar with him, even though I did kind of go through this on yesterday's show, with the news now being official, I'm sure I'm going to be having a lot of new viewers and listeners. If you like what you're listening or watching on today's episode, again, please go and hit that subscribe button for me. But Jeff Blashill is definitely someone who, even though he's only been an NHL head coach one time in his career, he has loads of coaching experience at many different levels. He first started being a coach back in 1998, right out of his playing days with his alma mater, Ferris State, where he actually spent 4 years being a goaltender. He then went on to spend 4 years being an assistant coach with that program as well, and then transitioned over to an assistant role with Miami University in Ohio for 6 years as well. So just that in alone of itself, 10 years of assistant coaching experience at the NCAA level, and then he wound up getting his first head coaching gig with the Indiana Ice of the USHL at the junior level, and in his first year there, where he was also the general manager, by the way, the team won the Clark Cup for the league championship, and they also made it all the way to the semifinals in his second. And because of the success that he had at the junior level, he moved on up the ranks and got a head coaching job with Western Michigan. And in his first year there, the Broncos had their best season in 15 years and made the NCAA tournament. That led to him getting yet another promotion, his first up in the NHL as an assistant under Mike Babcock with the Detroit Red Wings in 2011. He actually would only go on to spend 1 year in that role before getting promoted to the head coaching gig for the Wings minor league affiliate Grand Rapids Griffins. And just like he did in his first year with the Indiana Ice in the USHL, he coached the Grand Rapids Griffins to a league championship and won the Calder Cup. He also was named the best coach in the AHL that season, and across 3 years total coaching the Griffins, they won at least 42 games out of 76 in each of those 3 seasons. They also won a playoff series, at least one in each of those 3 seasons, and in total went 134, 71, and 23 under Blashill. So a lot of good work for him as a head coach at the AHL level as well as the USHL level. 2 very big developmental scenes, which I'll get into here in just a second. But from then, he went on to get his first NHL head coaching job, replacing Mike Babcock with the Red Wings in 2015. And his tenure with the Wings actually started off really solid. They qualified for the postseason in 2016, finishing 3rd in the Atlantic Division and accumulating 91 points. They did get bounced in the first round, though, in 5 games, winning just 1 postseason contest. And from there, things kind of turned sour for Blashill. Over his next 6 years as the Detroit Red Wings head coach, the team never won more than 33 games, and they also finished in the bottom 3 of the division 5 times. And this right here, Blackhawks fans, the lack of winning that Blashill did with the Red Wings in those final 5 years, this to me, at least from my understanding, is most Blackhawks fans' issue with Jeff Blashill. Based on what I've been seeing from Blackhawks Twitter, all across social media platforms, some of my buddies, this isn't necessarily a hire that Blackhawks fans are seemingly very approving of. I would say more Blackhawks fans are frustrated over this hire than they are happy. And to me, it has to be because the lack of winning and the amount of losing that he did in those final 6 years with the Red Wings. Because other than that, I quite honestly don't really know what there is to be all that upset about, considering the situation for the Blackhawks. As I've referenced, David Carl, we know he was the number one guy they had circled. I'm sure they made him a very luxurious offer, like I'm sure a lot of NHL teams did. But Carl ultimately decided that he wanted to remain with Denver, and I'm guessing that probably put a little bit of a wrinkle in the Blackhawks' plans. Outside of Carl, though, really the only other primetime head coach that to me would have moved the needle would have been Mike Sullivan, who just wanted to go to the New York Rangers, has ties with that organization, and they're just a little more set up to compete right here, right now than the Blackhawks are, as they're obviously still going through this rebuild. If you want to be upset about the Blackhawks missing out on Mike Sullivan or missing out on David Carl, I guess I understand that more so for Sullivan than Carl. I don't really know what the Blackhawks could have done differently in that situation. But because Carl and Sullivan were both off of the market, I do think that put the Blackhawks in a less than ideal situation. And I think that's where some of the rumblings were coming out about maybe Anders Sorensen returning as the head coach in an interim role for another season. And to me, it wouldn't have been worst case scenario, but this is definitely an improvement for the Blackhawks. And Jeff Blashill is not a bad coach. If you think Jeff Blashill was to blame for the failures that the Detroit Red Wings had for those 7 seasons solely, then you're mistaken, Blackhawks fans. Just diving into some of the team numbers and the rosters that Blashill dealt with in his time there, it's easy to see why those teams didn't win. His first season, they still had Pavel Datsyuk. They still had Henrik Zetterberg when he had a little bit left in the tank, and they had enough pieces to go and get into the Stanley Cup playoffs. But the 2016-17 season, Blashill's second year there, Pavel Datsyuk was gone. That was another year with Nicholas Kronwall, Joel Eriksson, Johan Franzen. Henrik Zetterberg isn't getting any younger. And in that 2016-17 season, Zetterberg was still their leading scorer, and they had no one else have more than 50 points. Their top players were Zetterberg, Gustav Nyquist, Tomas Tatar, Franz Nielsen, like a very aging roster. And I'm honestly shocked they won 33 of 82 games that season. But then looking at the 2017-18 year, in which they dipped down to 30 wins, their leading scorer was a 21-year-old Dylan Larkin. And in Zetterberg's second to last season, he was still the second leading scorer on that team, while Anthony Mantha, Gustav Nyquist, and an old Justin Abdelkader were next in terms of offensive production. And they had a horrible aging defense. Like I mentioned, Kronwall, Eriksson, and old Trevor Daley was there as well, right? Like, not a really talented roster that was good enough to go and make a run. And then in 2018-19, that's kind of when this team went into full rebuild mode, where Dylan Larkin was the face of the franchise, but they didn't have a whole heck of a lot of talent outside him. In fact, that year, Andreas Athanasiou was their second leading scorer with 54 points. And then we go and look at the 2019-20 season. Tyler Bertuzzi and Dylan Larkin were the only 2 players on that roster with 40 points, and they only won 17 of 71 games. Like, this was an actively tanking team as part of the Yzer plan, which definitely deserves its fair share of criticism for the lack of wins during Jeff Blashill's tenure. And then in his last year there, how about this, Blackhawks fans? In 2020-2021, the Red Wings won 19 of 56 games, again, actively tanking, where they have a couple of young players on the scene, but it's very reminiscent to what we've watched with the Blackhawks these last couple of seasons. Philip Hronek in 56 games was the Red Wings' leading scorer in 2021 with 26 points. That is not a joke, Blackhawks fans. So that's what Jeff Blashill was working with the Red Wings. And from there, they ultimately ended up letting him go. But I think it speaks volumes to Blashill's coaching ability, or at least how the Red Wings thought of him, considering they let him have a 7-year tenure there as their head coach. Despite the last 6, no more than 33 wins in a single season. They finished bottom 3 in the division 5 times, right? You think Blashill, if he was such a bad coach, he would have gotten fired, but it's because they were expecting to lose. They were actively tanking. So putting a ton of stock into Jeff Blashill's first tenure with the Red Wings. Listen, do I wish it went differently? Do I wish the Blackhawks hired a coach who had a little bit more winning on his resume in the NHL? Yes, but those options were, again, pretty thin at this point, considering Mike Sullivan was off the table and David Carl, their number one option, who, by the way, doesn't have any NHL experience. Even if he is a really good college coach, it still would have been an absolute gamble. Those 2 guys were off of the table. So maybe Jay Woodcroft would have been a good fit. That's someone that I had pointed out. Todd Nelson, who's done wondrous things with the Hershey Bears and just throughout his time coaching at the AHL level, he's someone I would have really liked to see the Blackhawks pursue, but I do wonder, because Hershey's still playing, might have made things difficult for the Blackhawks, and they want to name a head coach here sooner rather than later. So, again, I just think putting a ton of stock into Jeff Blashill's tenure with the Red Wings and saying, oh, he's a bad coach, well, just looking at that, in my opinion, that's wrong, because he was kind of set up for failure there, and he's done a lot of good things everywhere else he's been in his coaching career. And then he also spent the last 3 years working with John Cooper and the Tampa Bay Lightning as an assistant, with Cooper known as one of the best and the most well-respected coaches in the NHL. There's a reason he's the second longest tenured coach in the league and has 2 Stanley Cup championships. And with Blashill being under his leadership for the last 3 years, it certainly doesn't hurt his coaching experience. Blashill also worked with the penalty kill in the Lightning's defense. This past season, they were 6th in the league on the penalty kill, 8th in total goals against. So I do think that only can help Jeff Blashill in improving upon some of the things that maybe didn't work well for him in his first head coaching tenure under the Detroit Red Wings. Listen, ultimately, Blackhawks fans, to close out segment 1 here, do I think Jeff Blashill is an ideal hire? Do I think he's a slam dunk hire? Do I think he's a sexy hire? No, but it's definitely an improvement over Anders Sorensen, and the Blackhawks just really didn't have all that many options left on the table. And Blashill's someone who does have experience, even if it's a little limited at the NHL. He's now been in this league as a coach for 10, 11 years, right? So he does have a pretty good amount of experience, 7 years as a head coach, and just someone who, unlike Jeremy Colleton, unlike Luke Richardson, unlike Anders Sorensen, just has a wealth of coaching experience in general. This is a 51-year-old guy who's been coaching for the last 25 years. So it's definitely an uptick in experience behind the bench, and that's definitely something that the Blackhawks needed. And again, he's someone who's very familiar with the development level, very good with young players. That's important for the Blackhawks to take their next step in the rebuild. So listen, is Jeff Blashill, again, is he the sexiest hire? No, but I definitely think he can achieve what the Blackhawks are trying to do right here, right now. And considering this is going to be a tough statement for a lot of Blackhawks fans to hear, we're still, probably 2, 3, 4, probably not 4, at least I hope, 2 to 3 years removed from making like a legitimate run and hoping this is a good enough team to do something in the Stanley Cup playoffs, right? We're not asking Jeff Blashill to go in here and win playoff games right here, right now. And if you ask me at this very second, do I think Jeff Blashill is the coach for the Blackhawks when they get to that point? If I had to make an answer, I obviously don't know right here, right now, but if you force me to answer, I'd probably lean no. But the Blackhawks don't need him to be the long-term guy right now. They just need to aid in the development of the young players, which Blashill has been very good at in the past. He's helped develop guys like Dylan Larkin, Mo Sider, Lucas Raymond with the Detroit Red Wings, right? And is someone who has experience winning while also developing players at the same time. Yes, he didn't do a ton of that in Detroit, but I think the Blackhawks they just want to see improvements, and they're definitely better suited to improve this upcoming season and aid in the development of the young players under Jeff Blashill's leadership than they would have been under Anders Sorensen. So there are kind of my quick reaction, initial thoughts on Jeff Blashill being named the 42nd coach of the Chicago Blackhawks here today. There's going to be an official introductory presser for Blashill next Tuesday, May 27th, I believe, at 7 p.m. Central Time. So that's when we'll hear from him. That's when we'll see his picture taken along with the Blackhawks sweater. But coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll stay talking about Jeff Blashill, but instead of me sharing my opinion, I'll get into some opinions from several folks in the hockey industry. But first, real quick, I do got to talk to you all about Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Well, then go and crack into a great source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. And Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, with each 1 ounce serving having 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily nutritional value. Plus, they're packed with fiber to help keep you feeling fuller longer. And come on, who doesn't love a good pistachio? I know I certainly do. I could sit there literally eating them and cracking them all day long. And the satisfying crack of opening each shell, it's like a perfect mini snack meditation. And whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids at school, whatever it may be, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. So go and get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch by visiting wonderfulpistachios.com right now in order to learn more. Again, that's wonderfulpistachios.com to go and check it out today. Before I get into segment 2 here, Blackhawks fans, a quick heads up that I'll be getting into Anton Frondel's 2025 NHL draft profile on tomorrow's episode, a guy that's been mocked to the Blackhawks in one of the first 2 mock drafts that I've covered here on the show. And I'll also be getting into some updates from a chaotic quarterfinal round at the 2025 IIHF Men's World Championships. Make sure to be on the lookout for that tomorrow. But for segment 2 here on today's show, after going through my thoughts and opinions on the Blackhawks naming Jeff Blashill as their new head coach, I definitely wanted to be sure to share some quotes, noteworthy opinions, and other things from some key people in the hockey industry, some people who have, played with Jeff Blashill, played under Jeff Blashill, have coached along with Jeff Blashill, and just have experience in the industry. Definitely wanted to share their perspectives on Blashill being hired by the Blackhawks here on the show as well. First quote I wanted to bring up comes from Chris Chelios, Blackhawks legend, who actually coached alongside Jeff Blashill with the Grand Rapids Griffins when they won the Calder Cup. This is what Chris Chelios had to say about Blashill. Quote, I got a chance to coach with Blashill in Grand Rapids for 2 years. I was part of the staff there. We won the Calder Cup with him. Super guy. He's been with John Cooper since juniors. Coop's his mentor. In Tampa, he got a little more experience as an assistant coach. I was talking to Coop about it. The one thing I thought Blash lacked in Detroit was accountability in the physical part of the game. But now I think he's figured that part out with Cooper. Veteran guy for sure, very structured, hard worker, a super guy, and he knows how to relate to those young players, which is something the Hawks really need. Those last couple of sentences I think are very important. A veteran guy for sure. Blackhawks have been missing a veteran guy as their bench boss for a long, long time. Jeff Blashill checks that box. Very structured. Feels like the Blackhawks really haven't had the best structure in a long time either. Hard worker. Always love to hear that about your head coach. And all in all, just a super guy who can relate to the young players. Again, it's obviously going to be important with Connor Bedard, Frank Nazar, Sam Rinzel, Artem Levshinov being at the forefront of the youth movement, and all of them now being up in the NHL. Very, very important for Jeff Blashill to relate and help those guys along the development path and pick up from where they left off at the end of last season. Sure sounds like he's a guy who's capable of doing that. Do want to bring up, though, of course, Chelios kind of relaying that he thought the problem with Blashill in Detroit is maybe the accountability thing and the physical part of the game. Definitely some work with John Cooper, who knows how to keep his players accountable, obviously. While that is something that is concerning a little bit to hear, considering Anders Sorensen maybe didn't have the best accountability over his players late last season, and the accountability under Luke Richardson maybe at times was a little bit too much, and I think he was too forced on the defensive side of things. So that is something that, being an inexperienced head coach, you're going to have trouble with, right? Just kind of those interactions, being the main guy now with all of your players. So that is something to be looking out for when Jeff Blashill takes over. But again, definitely think more time with John Cooper, who, as Chris Chelios mentioned, is his mentor. Pretty darn good mentor to have, right? One of the best, if not the best coach in the entire NHL. Love to hear that about Jeff Blashill and his time with Tampa Bay. Next quote comes from John Buccigross, legend in the hockey community, right? The Bucci OT challenge. Not that I'm putting like a ton of stock into what John Buccigross is saying about Jeff Blashill here, but I do think it's worth mentioning on the show. Quote, excellent energy, command, and experience. Got the Detroit job at the worst time. Everywhere else he's coached, he's improved the environment. Won championships in the USHL and AHL. He's smart, self-aware, runs a good practice, which is very important for the Blackhawks. They got to get better in practice, I think, and translating that to the game-like situations, and just having inexperienced head coaches like Luke Richardson, Jeremy Colleton, and Anders Sorensen. It's easy for practices to not be as structured as they need to be. And again, from hearing from Chris Chelios, Jeff Blashill known to be a pretty structured guy. But I agree with a lot of what Buccigross has to say here. He just got to Detroit at a pretty bad time. They had made the playoffs. I mean, how many years in a row did Detroit qualify for the postseason? It was like 20 years or something crazy. And Blashill was the guy who was at the end of that tenure trying to keep the scraps together and be good enough in those 2016, 2017 seasons, kind of like the Blackhawks were at that same point in time, and kicking the can down the road on that rebuild. As us Hawks fans know, it'll come back to bite you in the butt. So I definitely agree with Bucci. Just a tough time for Blashill to go to Detroit, but has done a lot of good things at basically every other level. Here's another interesting quote on Jeff Blashill, which comes from former Blackhawk Brandon Hagel, who of course played under Blashill with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Hagel texted this to Ben Pope saying, quote, he teaches you how to play the right way. He's hard on you, but very understanding. You can tell him what you think is well. He's very easy to approach, close quote. So love to hear that from Hags, just a guy who players can be verbal to, can express their thoughts and be open. I think that's always best for any type of work-like situation, right? If you want to function at 100% efficiency, everyone's got to be open and honest with each other. And I definitely think that's going to be a part of the Blackhawks taking a step from where they were to where they want to be. They got to be honest about why things didn't go very well last season, in the last few seasons, quite honestly. And then the last quote I wanted to read comes from general manager Kyle Davidson himself. I know it's typical GM talk here, but just definitely wanted to share what Davidson himself had to say about the guy that he's hiring to be the franchise's next head coach. Quote, Jeff is an incredibly smart and talented coach who boasts more than 25 years of coaching experience across developmental leagues, the NHL, and the world stage. He's thrived when in a position to develop young players and has shown he's capable of blending that into overall team success. A vision and philosophy we share for where we are today and where we see our team in the future. We couldn't be more excited for what's to come under Jeff's direction. And again, a lot of this is what I agree with and why I understand Jeff Blashill being brought in, because he does have all that success across the developmental leagues and has developed players in the NHL too. Even though they didn't do a lot of winning in Detroit, there's no denying that Dylan Larkin, Mo Seider, and Lucas Raymond have all developed into pretty darn good players. And Jeff Blashill had at least some say in that as their head coach. Also sharing the overall vision and philosophy of the team's success and where they need to go. I think that's just kind of in line with what I talked about a few minutes ago. Jeff Blashill isn't being brought in here to turn this thing around overnight to go and get this team ready to win playoff games next season. No, it's still going to be an entire process. And as someone who's kind of been part of that process before with the Detroit Red Wings, he's familiar with this type of situation. He understands it. And I feel like for a guy like Luke Richardson, who, by the way, was definitely dealt a bad hand here in Chicago for his first NHL head coaching gig, but he was just put in a really tough spot because He was literally the head coach from the beginning of the rebuild. The team was basically set up to lose while he's trying to save his job by doing good things and like keeping the vibes high. It was almost an impossible task. Jeff Blashill has familiarity with the rebuild and they're kind of at the latter stages of it. So I do think Jeff Blashill is a good guy for the development side of things. Is the jury out on him, whether he can be a winning NHL head coach? Yes, definitely. And we're going to find out if he can be that guy here in Chicago. But again, we're not asking him to have this team win 45 to 50 games next year. We definitely got to get an improvement, Jeff. We need to be better, but we're not asking anything unrealistic. And that's why I think as a short-term hire to help in the development, Jeff Blashill makes a lot of sense. So that kind of takes care of full thoughts on Jeff Blashill officially being the Blackhawks' next head coach here today. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans. I know I'm already running a little bit long, but I still got to get into an update on what this means for Anders Sorensen's future. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you all for making Blackhawks your very first listen or your first watch each and every day. For your second listen or watch, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, up until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale with Locked On NHL, which you can now find on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, before I close out today's episode, definitely had to mention as well that Anders Sorensen will be remaining with the Blackhawks staff under Jeff Blashill as an assistant coach. Another move that, based on what I saw on Blackhawks Twitter, didn't really sit too well with a lot of Blackhawks fans. Personally, for me, I think the more ideal situation would have been for Sorensen to retain his job as the Rockford Ice Hogs head coach. I think I would have preferred him in that spot. But at the same point in time, and I really don't I know there are so many people that don't like the Jeff Blashill hiring, so many people that don't like Sorensen coming back. I promise I'm not one of these people who always drinks Kyle Davidson's Kool-Aid. If you go back to last year's NHL draft, I didn't like the Artem Levshunov pick. You go back to last year's free agency, didn't like the Brody Bertuzzi or even the Teravainen contracts. So this isn't my typical forte to just agree with everything the Blackhawks do. And again, bringing back Sorensen isn't my favorite move, but I do understand it because regardless of how you feel about Anders Sorensen, the young players performed well with him as the head coach at the end of the year. And that's important. That's the name of the game right here, right now for the Blackhawks. And why I understand him remaining as an NHL head coach is because a lot of the guys that he's familiar with, who he's been developing in Rockford as the head coach the last couple of years before getting promoted to the NHL as an interim, most of those guys are now on the NHL scene, and you want to continue to build off of what they did late last year. So having that continuity with Sorensen as a guy who has done good things in the development scene. Do I think he was a good head coach? No, I think he lacked the authority. I think he kind of lacked the overall experience to be a true bench boss, but now he doesn't have to be. Jeff Blashill can go and be that type of guy, while Sorensen can just focus on the development side of things. So as much as Blackhawks fans don't like Anders Sorensen or him returning, he did good things with, Frankie Nazar, Ethan Del Mastro, Sam Rinzel, Alex Vlasic, who developed under Sorensen's leadership down in Rockford, Kevin Korchinski, Artem Levshunov, all these guys who looked good on the NHL scene late in the year, they're all going to be back up with this team next year as well. So it does make sense to allow Sorensen and them to continue along with each other. However, Blashill will be bringing in 2 new assistant coaches in addition to Sorensen. One of them we know is officially going to be Michael Pekka, longtime former NHLer, someone who I actually watched when I was growing up, played in the NHL from 94 to 2009, one of those vets who was just around forever, but good veteran leader, wore a letter on his chest a couple of times in his career, and also won 2 Selke trophies for the best defensive forward in the entire league. Known as someone who's very intense, played very hard in his days, and obviously played the game the right way. So sounds like a pretty good guy to bring in. And Pekka is also the same age as Jeff Blashill, both of them 51 years old. For Pekka, his first pro coaching gig was 4 years ago when he took a job as an assistant coach for the Rochester Americans, the Buffalo Sabres minor league crew. And he was in charge of the power play and the forwards for the Sabres, and got to work with guys like Jack Quinn, JJ Paterka, Yuri Kulich, and the Americans power play was top 15 both years he ran it down in the AHL. The last 2 years, Pekka was up in the NHL as an assistant coach for the New York Rangers and worked with them in particular at the faceoff dot. That's really, again, what Pekka was known for, being savvy on the defensive side of things and being a really good faceoff man. He's a career 51.4 faceoff guy in the NHL. And the Rangers last year, after being in the bottom half of the league for like 6 straight seasons, they were fifth in the NHL at 52.9% at the dot. And also the Rangers power play in 23-24, Pekka's first year running that, they were third in the league. Now, they did take a dip down to 28th this year, but there were a lot of problems going on with the New York Rangers. But all in all, a guy who, again, defensively responsible, good at the faceoff dot, which is going to be very important for guys like Connor Bedard, Frank Nazar, and Oliver Moore, who need help in that department. And then also the power play. Blackhawks man advantage was actually pretty good last year, but I still think there's another level for them to get to. And Pekka, again, has past experience in that department. So I think a pretty good guy to bring on. As far as who the other assistant coach could be, Mike Vellucci is rumored to be in the running for that second job. He's someone who's been a coach / front office executive for like seemingly ever. First got into coaching way back in 1994 and spent the past 5 years working with the Pittsburgh Penguins, where his duties were the penalty kill and the forwards. So considering Pekka would work with the forwards as well, at least based on his past experience. Well, I guess Vellucci isn't even here yet, so I shouldn't really get ahead of myself. But we know Pekka is going to be working with the power play, I'd assume, going to be working with the forwards. It would make sense for the Blackhawks to bring in someone next who could work with their defensemen and the penalty kill. I know Anders Sorensen has done some good things with the blue liners in the past, but that's who I would probably be looking for. Could be Mike Vellucci, if not him, someone who kind of fits that bill. But with Blashill bringing in 2 new assistants and Sorensen sticking on as an assistant, that means the Hawks are cleaning house on their staff. Kevin Dean, Derek King, Derek Plant, all will no longer be with the team. And honestly, to me, this is music to my ears. I know Kevin Dean, Derek King, Derek Plant, kind of enough said right there. I love Kinger, love the vibes. Don't really know how good of an NHL assistant he is. Kevin Dean is definitely the most noteworthy loss here for the Blackhawks. He worked with their defensemen and very well respected in the NHL. I'm sure he'll be getting a job not too far down the road. He worked with the Blackhawks defensemen while he was here, and while there have been a lot of good things from the Blackhawks youngsters on the blue line, they also weren't a very good defensive team for quite a while. So I'm honestly not too upset about Kevin Dean departing, and even Alex Vlasic kind of took a step back last year. So I'm not upset with the Blackhawks and Jeff Blashill bringing in a new guy to kind of take over the D-corps and the penalty kill there. But that wraps up a very eventful day for the Chicago Blackhawks. New head coach in Jeff Blashill. Anders Sorensen will remain as an assistant. Michael Pekka coming on. Still one more assistant coach to be named. Whenever that happens, I'll make sure to break it all down right here on Locked On Blackhawks. But that's going to close out today's episode, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on the show. Reminder to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well, wherever you may be listening to your podcast. That way, you don't miss out on any of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. I guess the latest Blackhawks episodes. If you don't want to miss out on any of the Blackhawks' latest news and updates, can you tell that I've been talking for the last 35 minutes consistently? Go and follow @TalkinHockey on X, my strictly Blackhawks account. But until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Thursdays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.